Welcome back into the Rowdy Studio. I'm Stephen Levine. Tom Vandervoort sitting alongside me, heading to the paperclip, Martinsville, one of my favorite tracks. 2 drag strips connected by 2 U-turns.
Very flat and tight in the corners, and obviously that's the key to this racetrack. It's pretty interesting when you think about Martinsville, because I think it's a great combination of finesse and yet aggression, because there's not a lot of room out there, so you really have to defend the bottom of the racetrack. You've got to defend your position. You can't be afraid to use the bumper if you have to, but to drive these corners well, you have to be very careful not to overdrive them, not to get in there too hard. And I think you find that Denny Hamlin and Jimmy Johnson in particular have that kind of finesse style where they can get in there easy, get through the center pretty good, and get back on the gas a little bit earlier than a lot of drivers. And that's what makes them so successful here. So a cool combination of aggression and finesse, I think.
And I would say the other thing that you really want to think about when you're watching Martinsville, or at least watching the days leading up to the Martinsville race, is qualifying. Because as you said, there's not a lot of room out there. It's not the easiest place in the world to pass. So you don't want to qualify back in the high 20s or even the high teens. You want a choice starting spot and a choice selection of pit box.
Yeah, pit road is tricky.
It's going to make your life a lot more difficult if you're mired in the back of the pack.
That's
or you
absolutely
have
the case.
A crappy pit stall.
That's absolutely the case. And the other aspect of Martinsville, when you think about how flat the corners are, and you can get up to some pretty good speeds, over 100 miles an hour, certainly at the end of the front and back stretch. And one thing you have to think about is taking care of your brakes here. And if you get into the corners too hard and you lean on the brakes too hard, if you're using the brake while you're turning the car, if you're using a lot of brake while you've got a lot of wheel in it, you can burn the brakes up, and then that can really hinder you when you do need to try to dive in there a little harder and get underneath somebody. So taking care of your brakes and starting up front, as you're saying, will help you take care of your brakes. You don't have to be as aggressive in the corners when you're up towards the front.
And you want to, like you said, save those brakes so that at the end of the race, if you have to get aggressive, you have the brakes that it will enable you to do so.
Yeah, one example of when you might drive into the corner a little bit harder is when you're trying to get that nose underneath someone to make a pass. You might drive in there a little bit harder than you normally would, and you want to have your full stopping power when you do that.
Which also suggests that you need a fair amount of patience at Martinsville, and you need to choose those moments very specifically.
That's true. And then also you have to think about the setup of the race car, because if the setup of the race car doesn't allow you to turn the car and forces you to use more brake, then that's another hindrance to you. But of course, if you free it up too much, it's pretty hard to step on the gas and get going without the back end coming out from under you. So it's a very, very challenging racetrack, and that's why I see Jimmy and Denny, having figured out all those pieces that we just talked about, are so successful here.
Well, let's set Jimmy and Denny aside.
Although they haven't won since 2010 here,
but
those
clearly
guys.
They're still the favorites, and you're going to pick one of them, and I'm going to pick the other one. So let's not discuss them. Let's discuss the other people that are worth having on your radar when approaching Martinsville. There are a few people that I think are worth talking about.
Well, we know some of the guys that have won here lately haven't been Jimmy and Denny. They've been Ryan Newman, they've been Tony Stewart, they've been Kevin Harvick. The guy I really like here, though, coming back from concussion, is Dale Earnhardt Jr. I think this kind of track is the kind of track he runs well. He has never won here, but had several very good finishes here. I would keep my eye on the 88 car.
He's got the 4th best average finish after Denny, Jimmy, and Jeff Gordon, and I think he has 4 straight top 10s at this racetrack. So Junior is definitely, and he's going to be energized. This will be his first race in what, 3 weeks? So I think he's definitely one to watch. Jeff Gordon is the other guy. Jeff Gordon has something like, I wrote it down because it was such an amazing statistic, 16 top 5s in the last 19 Martinsville races.
Yeah, it's amazing he hasn't won here more recently. He used to be one of those guys. It used to be, instead of Jimmy and Denny, it used to be Tony and Jeff.
But Jeff was in position in the spring to win.
No, I think Jeff Gordon's a guy you got to look at. And Tony Stewart, too. You know, he hasn't had the greatest of chases, but he did win this race last year on his way to the championship. But I'm not counting on a lot from him, but it wouldn't surprise me if he were up there contending for the win.
I will say this about Brad Keselowski. I'm not putting him at the same level of those other guys, but his past 2 qualifying efforts have resulted in 7th and 3rd, decent qualifying efforts, and he recorded his first single-digit finish at Martinsville last spring. I don't think he's going to be challenging for the win, but he may do enough to stay ahead of Jimmy and Denny in the points, even if one of those guys
What we've seen, I think, in the past chases at this track is when you're on your game as a driver and a team, and I think they are right now over there at Penske with the 2 car, that you can really outperform yourself at some of these racetracks. We've seen it with Denny Hamlin at Dover. Obviously, Keselowski went ahead and won that race. And I think we're going to see some of that with Keselowski here at Martinsville. He hasn't been horrible here. He's been right around 10th to 15th, somewhere in there.
He's got 2 top 10s and
couple
5
top
starts.
10s. So he's also a very smart guy. So I think he's been learning.
Yeah.
For all those races he's come and run here so far. So I think we'll see the fact that the team is really on their game right now. I think we'll see him finish in the top 10, and I think he'll be challenging for finish in the top 5. Hard to see him challenging for the win here, but I think he'll finish in the top 10.
All right, that's Tom. I'm Steven. Enjoy the Martinsville race. We'll be back to talk about everything that happened on Monday.